Welcome to Diving Deeper Discussions. I'm your host, Randy Isaac, on behalf of the American Scientific Affiliation, and we're here to discuss our journal, Perspectives on Science and Christian Faith. And we discuss each quarterly issue here, the current issue, and this is open to the public, not just to members, and we're glad that you could all join us for this time. Today, we begin discussion of the current issue, which is the September 2022 issue of Perspectives. And the article is Continuity, Simplification, and Paradigm Shifting in Biological Evolution. The author is Sy Garte. And Sy, we're delighted to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Sy, I think most people here in the audience know you as the editor of God and Nature, editor-in-chief, and we appreciate you doing that. It's a great kind of publication that complements perspectives in a helpful way. It doesn't compete, but it's a complementary view. But I think most people probably don't know much more about you. So let's take just a few minutes as we start to help people get to know you a little better. So what's your background, Sy? Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, which people may have heard of. I attended public schools. I went to the High School of Music and Art in New York and then City College. Got a degree in chemistry, and then I got a PhD in biochemistry at the City University of New York.
You really stayed in the city, didn't you?
I stayed in New York for a long time, and then I left.
And never went back.
Well, I occasionally visit.
Yeah. So let's slow down a little bit. Let me help you. You said you majored in chemistry in undergrad. Is that what you said? Wait, how'd you get interested in chemistry? What were the factors that led you to become a chemist?
Well, it's very mysterious. The one hint might be that my father was a chemist. So.
That's a big one. Yeah.
And I, he helped me out, and then I realized I really liked it. I actually started as a biology major, and I hated that because I took comparative anatomy, and I felt that was just memorization of things, and I didn't like that. I wasn't good at it, but I like chemistry because you had to think and you could solve problems, and so I like chemistry.
So then you kind of folded biology back in to get into biochemistry. Right. Yeah,
exactly.
And what led you to do that?
Well, I mean, chemistry is all fine and nice, but biochemistry is fantastic because it's the study of life in a chemical sense. So I've never regretted 1 minute that I, ended up as a biochemist. I think it's the best field to be in.
Okay, so you got your degree, your PhD in biochemistry. What did you do then?
I got a postdoc at NYU in the Department of Environmental Medicine or Environmental Health Services, Sciences. I did that for a while, then I joined the faculty, and I stayed at NYU for quite a while. Not in New York. This was outside of the city in a institute northwest of the city.
Which one? Because
the Institute of Environmental Medicine, the Nelson Institute.
Ah, okay.
It's not there anymore, but it was while I was there.
Okay.
And I eventually became a tenured professor there, and then eventually moved out. And I took a position at Rutgers, where I was for several years. Eventually, I went to the University of Pittsburgh for about 3 years. And all in schools of public health or departments of environmental health. And then I decided I was done with grant writing and academia, so I took a position at the NIH as a division director in the Center for Scientific Review. So I'm the guy people can yell at if they didn't get their grants funded.
I didn't realize you worked for NIH. That's good.
Yeah, it's about 6 years. I came just before Francis arrived.
Okay. All right. And then?
He's my boss. Yeah.
Okay. And then what was after NIH?
After that, I retired, and
Okay.
somewhere during that period, that long career, I dropped my very militant atheism, which I had grown up with. My family
Yeah.
were
Let's backtrack here and get your faith history a little bit.
Yeah, so my faith history was that my family were three generations of very strong atheists and communists. My parents were in the American Communist Party. And I grew up with absolutely no hint of any kind of religion or spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, this whole story is told in my book, which, if you don't mind, I'll plug it now. It's called
Sure. Yeah, I remember reading it.
The Works of His Hands, A Scientist's Journey from Atheism to Faith,
Mm-hmm.
published by Kriegel in 2019, actually on the same day that Greg Davidson published his first book. So you know Greg.
Good. Yeah, it's good.
By the same publisher. So
Right.
we
Yeah.
talked about that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, back to the story. So yeah, I eventually dropped the communism part pretty quick, and then began wondering about God a little bit, and through a lot of things which are too long to talk about now, I eventually became an agnostic. And in the fullness of time and with the help of the Holy Spirit, I came to Christ in my 50s, was baptized at the age of 65. And once I retired, I spent the rest of up until now, which is 7 years, working in the idea of faith and science. I got active in BioLogos. I joined ASA.
How'd you find out about ASA?
I found out about ASA because it was in 2010. I live outside of Washington, D.C., and I was alone. I was a Christian. I called myself a Christian, but I wasn't in a church. I hadn't yet been baptized. I didn't know any other Christians in sciences. And somewhere I saw an ad for an ASA meeting at Catholic University. And I said, well, look at this. Well, I knew that Francis Collins was a scientist and a Christian, but I didn't know anybody else. And when I saw this ad for ASA, I said, well, maybe I should drive over. It's not that far. And I walked in, and the first thing I did was I walked into a room where this guy was talking very loud and people were yelling at him. It was Dennis Lamoureux. And I started talking to him, and we became friends. And I just met a lot of other people at that point. And then I joined ASA, and here I am.
All right, that's fantastic. Quite a journey. Thank you for sharing that. And as you said, for more details, read the book. But let's narrow down to the article at hand here. Can you tell me a little bit about the history? How is it that you got interested in this topic, and how is it you came about to actually write the article?
Yeah, so I've been very interested in the biological theory and the whole issue of evolution versus some of its competitors. I'm a very strongly hold to the theory of evolution as a really wonderful theory. I've communicated with Richard Dawkins in the old days, and had even made a discovery about Darwin, which is too long to go into. But evolution is great. But I began wondering about some things that weren't quite covered by evolution. And in 2016, I published an article in PSCF about the extended evolutionary synthesis, and that got some interesting reactions. And I thought of that as a sort of a new way for evolution to move into. And then in 2017, I had these ideas about teleology, and I wrote another article for PSCF about how teleology could be seen in biology related to evolution. And I think that's the title of the article, more or less. And I've been on that kick ever since. And I think to summarize it, my view is that the theory of evolution is fantastic, but it's not complete. And I believe that it is not a biological theory of everything. There's something missing. I don't know what that thing is, but I think that I've especially been interested in the origin of life. And one of the reasons I wrote this article is because in 2020, I published a paper in Acta Biotheoretica, a mainstream theoretical biology journal, about the origin of life. And that paper is referenced in this article, in the PSCF article. And one of the reasons I wrote the article was I wanted to bring attention to that paper. That paper is pretty much presents what I consider some actual scientific evidence for the idea that there are thresholds that have to be passed in order to reach life. So I have this general idea that the origin of life is not going to ever be fully explained following only the laws of known chemistry and physics, that there's something else that we're not getting. Now, this is not ID. I say that in the paper very clearly. I'm not proposing, miraculous approaches to the origin of life, because this is all my scientific worldview, which, miracles don't help. So I'm looking for something else that can help us make progress in understanding the origin of life. And as you well know, Randy, you and I and Steve Freeland have been back and forth on this whole issue of continuity and gradualism. And this article that just got published is in that vein. In other words, so it's talking about three different things which are all related. First is this issue of continuity and evolution, and I'm claiming that for many things many things violate that idea of continuity during evolution, including the origin of life, or certainly self-replication as part of the origin of life. And then I talk about a little bit about simplification, which comes from the article, your article with Steve Freeland, and I kind of defend that and talk about its connection to how simplification and complexification, the two together, are really important in understanding that. I think, and I wanted to put that in because I think that paper by Steve and you, which I remember brought a lot of discussion here at this Diving Deeper session. I kind of wanted to back that up a little bit. And then the last part of it, it's really a three-part article, is what I call paradigm shifting. And what I'm looking at there, and this is very speculative, of course, is the idea that maybe, and this idea comes from, it's not original with me, it comes from a number of biologists, most of whom are not theists, by the way, who are saying that, we need to bring concepts of agency and teleology back into biology to make progress, because they were thrown out inappropriately. And I think the words I use is the throwing out the baby of teleology with the bathwater of metaphysics was a mistake. So, okay. So that's that. It's a philosophical and somewhat scientific article.
So it's an ongoing area of interest for you. And,
yes, correct.
And we appreciate that you submitted it to PSCF and that we can discuss it here. So thank you for kind of summarizing that article, and I'm sure it's going to generate a good discussion here. So with that, we'll move on to the question and answer period. And we've got 5 questions that were submitted in advance. We'll start with that and then open up the mics for all of you to participate. Let me just remind you that if you'd like to make a comment, ask a question or whatever, go to the reaction icon on at the bottom of your screen, and look for that set of options which says raise hand. You activate that, and that's how I will see your hand and call upon you to ask your question. So, Becky, go ahead and open it for the microphones, and we'll start with these. The first one in was Ken Turian, but I see uncharacteristically Ken hasn't signed in yet. He's been a faithful member. He had a simple question. I'm going to go ahead and read it because I think it's a good way just to very quickly set the tone where we are. So I'll read what he submitted. Ken Turian says, Hebrews 11:3 states that, quote, by faith we understand that what is seen, namely origins, what was not made up of what is visible. Did I get that right? NIV. I interpret this proclamation that there is a seamless transition between the unseen world and the visible one, ergo God, with his creation of the invisible and visible worlds, allowing origins to proceed. So, Sy, if the two worlds represent one reality, then direct and indirect statements become superfluous for the Christian. They both are his design. Okay?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I think the answer is yes. Okay, I pretty much agree that with your. I guess Ken's not here yet. With Ken's statement, and I would say that we. Direct or indirect, whichever is true. As scientists, we really want to know how God created. We already agree, I believe, we all agree that he did create the world. So, yeah, I think direct and indirect statements do become superfluous. So,
yeah. Basically, in the ASA terminology history here, after Robert Fisher's book, we're here not to ask whether God did it. That's kind of our basis here, but how God did it.
Right.
God did it, but how? And so as we go through this discussion, I think that's kind of nice to kind of document that perspective. Now, the second question was from Jack McIntyre, and he also just wrote me to say he was not able to join. He has a little bit more specific question here, which again I will read and let you address. Jack writes, fine-tuning is a concept well established in our understanding of physical forces at work in the emergence of the cosmos. My question concerns fine-tuning in the account of evolutionary biology. Evolutionary descent of biota would not have happened without a delicate balance between the survival force, that is self-preservation, and an equally necessary death force, that is self-destruction. If we speak in terms of a teleonomy and agonomy of survival as a driving force in evolution, is there not a sense in which we must also recognize and account for a teleonomy and agonomy of death? Is there a parametric form in which this counterpoint between self-preservation, the survival force, and self-destruction, the death force, defines a critical sensitivity of fine-tuning in the theory of biological evolution?
It's a great question that I haven't thought about, or I thought I hadn't thought about it, and then I realized I really have. So, in early life and in many life forms that are current, you don't really need a death force because the ability to live is very difficult. So if anything disrupts the normal homeostasis of cells, for example, or many primitive organisms, they simply die. So the death force doesn't have to be a separate thing. On the other hand, there are biochemical mechanisms for death, which is called apoptosis. And, there is the Hayward, is it Hayward? I forgot the word, the name of the guy, but there is a limit to how many times cells can divide before they lose their ability to continue to divide and live. So there are some mechanisms to provide for death, and some of them include things like very specific biochemical mechanisms that include the buildup of eras that eventually lead to death. And it's an area of some research. But, it's a very interesting topic because there are some organisms that don't age. They just keep growing until they die of starvation or something. And these are rare, but they're generally invertebrates, but it does exist. So I think his general point is right, is that there has to be a balance between life and death. But the harder thing to explain is life and homeostasis. That's very difficult. And when we're talking about the origin of life and primitive cells, early organisms, the mystery is not how these things die. That's fairly easy to understand. What the mystery is how they remain alive.
Well, maybe the terminology is confusing us a little bit here. I wonder if it would make more sense if instead of a death force, we talked about a death rate. And instead of a survival force, maybe talk about a reproduction rate. Because it seems to me that every species does have a very delicate balance here. That is, that the rate of reproduction and the basically the survival rate, the death rate, there's a real balance here. I mean, we can all immediately think of species that have, countless offspring, but the death rate is very high. Right. Or there are species that have very few offspring, but the death rate is relatively common. So each species seems to have its own fine tuning of that balance.
Yeah, and that fine tuning comes from ecological evolution. In other words, the evolution of communities, because you have predator-prey relationships, which are very complicated. You have, if you have these are the equations have been posted. The difference equations showing, if you have too many foxes, you'll end up with no rabbits. If you have too many rabbits, you'll end up with, overpopulation and everybody dies. So there's an ecological balance as well. And even without that, as what you said is true, it's finely tuned. But that fine tuning is easily explained.
Right. Yeah. And that's, like you said before, it's the beauty of the theory of evolution in many ways, because that fine tuning occurs in some sense naturally, because in cases where the reproductive rate and the death rate are not in balance, those species are basically going to become extinct if the death rate's too high. And if it's too low, it will overwhelm their ecological system, and again the whole ecosystem may go. So it is in many ways a self-balancing thing. And here I may put in my plug to my typical comment on the fine-tuning of the universe. Many people like to talk about how the universe is finely tuned for life. And my response typically is that from a scientific point of view, it makes much more sense to think about life being fine-tuned for the universe. And in the first case, you've got retrocausation to worry about. It doesn't make much sense scientifically, but in this case, evolution is the obvious answer of how life became fine-tuned for the universe. Anyway, so much for that. But I think this is an interesting question that Jack had, and I appreciate your answering to that. All right. Let's move on. Marty, good to see you here again. I know you can be counted on for a few questions. You've got 3 questions here. You've got a number of people. May I ask you to kind of pick one of them for now, and we'll go on to some of the others who've submitted questions, then we'll come back to you. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Randy.
Okay.
Yeah, just to put myself in a context here, I volunteer with Reasons to Believe, and I'm a progressive creationist myself. I had trouble, Sy, reading your article, trying to decide whether you were an evolutionary creationist or a progressive creationist. I wasn't sure, but you've already said you're not fond of ID. I think I'd like to just pick up on that. So this is my second question here. In your paragraph on God of the Gaps, you stating these kinds of gaps imply a divine intervention or the work of a designer does little to address the scientific issues involved. And I responded, I would go further and say it does literally nothing to address the scientific issues, okay? But it also does nothing to prevent further investigations. There's way too many scientific issues that we can address, more than we have funding for. But the thing is that we have a deep human desire to interpret the science, to understand it. And therefore, I feel that dismissing discussions about whether the science indicates discontinuities of the kind that maybe, probably, possibly required some divine intervention is like arguing that in English classes we can only talk about grammar and spelling. Why can't we talk about these discontinuities and say, yeah, they're pretty severe, and certainly that's one of the interpretations that's not invalid.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can talk about that. It depends on the context of where we're talking. I consider PSCF to be both a scientific and a theological journal, but I'm not a theologian. So when I want to say something to my colleagues at ASA in PSCF, I tend to write only about science. However, in other contexts, I do a lot of speaking online, on YouTube. I'm a guest on a lot of shows, and I've participated in some debates. For example, I've been a guest on Jim Tour's show. Okay, and and he's not exactly pure ID, but he heads in that direction. And in those contexts, when we're talking about the possibility that we can use some of our scientific knowledge to back up in a sort of apologetic sense, to back up the evidence for existence of God, I will say things of the type you just said. I will say that this is a pointer to God. Francis Collins does the same thing. He uses the word pointer, and he talks about fine tuning. He talks about a number of other things. And certainly anything that Francis does, I feel perfectly comfortable in imitating. So your point is good. I again, for this article, I really wanted to focus on the scientific worldview, and the main thrust of what I'm saying is that is a scientific issue, which is that biology is not done with evolution as we know it. Darwinian evolution as we know it is great. It's continually changing. It's continually progressing. And people who say it's all done, we know it all, it's natural selection, explains everything, there's nothing else to do, I think are wrong scientifically. And as I said before, I'm not making this up. This is coming from people like Dennis Noble, James Shapiro, several others. I have quotes from that I could show if I needed. And these are not theists. So, it's a scientific issue in this case.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you. I'll just respond and say I think it sounds like we're very much on the same page as far as that goes.
Yeah, I've had some great discussions with Buzz Rana, for example, scientific discussions, and maybe a little bit of edging into theology, but not much. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So we'll come back to you, Marty, your other questions, but we had a couple of others first. Del Kuhn, we can always count on you for a question, which is good. Take it.
Hi, Randy. Thanks, and thanks, Sy, for the article. I thought it was really thought-provoking. Question, is there any work being done or suggestions on what could actually be measured or even better quantified for a teleology of agency? Intuitively, I think that a cat stalking a bird has more of, quote, something than a firefly blinking that ought to be more than just the number of neurons firing.
Yeah, I love that question, Del, because that is the question that I've been asking myself and anyone else I can find to listen to for some time. Is there any way? I mean, it's one thing to say, let's bring teleology back into biology, but the question then is how? And, what I'm interested in is finding new laws in biology. Not me, I'm not going to find any new laws, but for people to start looking into, the idea that there may be some laws in biology that would explain things like evolutionary convergence or origin of life or things like that. And I just have this hunch, which may have nothing behind it, that including purpose and the idea of agency, which have been excluded entirely, that it would probably be a good step to bring them in. But I don't have any clue as how to measure it. I've tried to find this. Most people who talk about teleology are philosophers. They're not really big on measurements. So it's wide open. I wish I knew the answer to that. And if anybody does, please let me know. Great question.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Del. And then we have Carlos Pinkton. Where are you? Carlos Pinkham. There you are. Okay. Go ahead, Carlos. Unmute yourself, and then we can hear you.
I'm working on it. There we go.
Okay.
Got it. Hi, Sy. I'm just going to read the question that I have. I didn't realize that. I thought maybe Randy would read it for me, but okay. So here it is. If I understand your thesis correctly, you were saying much of the saltation we see in the biological evolution from protocell to us is real, and I agree with that, and is due to a continuous global filtration of micro changes occurring in a myriad of restricted local populations, such that sooner or later, one of the micro changes hits upon a paradigm shift that makes its local population immensely more successful than any pure populations. And this change rapidly takes over the world. If so, and maybe I should stop right there and ask you, have I cut your thesis correctly here?
That's a good question. I'm not sure because I don't completely understand your interpretation of what I'm saying. I'm not talking about a new paradigm. Well, let me look at it again. I'm not talking about a population which hits upon a new paradigm shift. The paradigm shift doesn't really, in other words, I don't actually have a theory that I'm proposing. So I'm just sort of talking about the idea that saltations are very important, especially for the origin of life, and the details of that are in my paper about self-replication and what's required to get that started. But I don't really think about this as a single population or a subpopulation, restricted population hitting on a paradigm shift, and I think so. I think that's not quite right. Also, I don't know what you mean by immensely more successful. I mean, in standard evolutionary terms, you don't really need to be immensely more successful. You just need to be a little bit more successful than a competing population. So I'm glad you stopped after the first paragraph because, I'm not sure that that's really what I was trying to say, especially this idea of the paradigm shift. I don't know what you mean there. It's probably different from what I meant.
I think I was reading into what you were saying in your article, that the saltations that we saw, that we know exist in the evolutionary record, were remarkable and unexpected, and in that sense, a paradigm shift, perhaps.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, yeah. Okay, that does make sense because, in fact, when you have something like a whole genome duplication event, which is very rare. You can mutate everything in the genome without causing any harm, and that was that there were two of those events that occurred before and leading up to the development of vertebrates. So that was a paradigm shift in biology. All of a sudden, you had organisms with an entirely new body plan, the vertebrate body plan, which came from this very dramatic saltational step. So yeah, that's correct. That's right. And that's not what I meant in the article, but that doesn't matter because your version is completely, correct. Okay. You get a paradigm shift in the sense that biology is now taking a whole new route. And in fact, mammalian pregnancy, the other example I give in the paper, is the same thing. There was a transposon insertion, which led to the changes in expression of a whole suite of genes. And the next thing you know, you have all these changes which allow, pregnancy in mammals, which is a brand new route for biology to take. And again, you could call that a paradigm shift. So yes, that happened. So with that definition, then I think we're okay, and we can go to your actual question, which is
yeah. Go ahead, Carlos.
Okay, so I see this happening fairly easily in populations that are reproducing asexually, but when you get to a sexually reproducing population, the process of passage of this new adaptation, this new way of solving problems around the world is going to take a lot longer and is going to not necessarily replace populations that are less efficient. It'll just push them into perhaps more restricted habitats. Are you seeing more difficulty when you get into sexual reproduction as opposed to asexual or asexual reproduction prior to protocells and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point, and I have to admit that I haven't really thought about it because I didn't really understand what you meant by paradigm shift. But now that I do, I'm thinking furiously for examples, and you have a point in that saltational dramatic changes in evolution, and anyone can please correct me because I'm probably forgetting a lot, but they tend to be less frequent once you have mammals, reptiles, sexual selection, which is a fairly recent thing in evolutionary time compared to bacteria. And I think that those jumps still occur. I just at the moment, can't think of an example. Well, other than pregnancy, which I just mentioned, which actually occurred after sexual, replication. A more interesting way to look at this is that sexual reproduction turns out to be important actually going backwards in time, so that modern bacteria use some vague forms of sexual reproduction as well. We call it horizontal gene transfer, but I'm not sure that's a dividing line between the frequency of paradigm shifts as you would define them, large saltational jumps. There may be a dividing line somewhere in evolutionary history. I would doubt it's that, but it might be something else. So but I'm not giving you a great answer because I really haven't thought about this. And I thought you would mean something completely different. So, but it's an interesting thing to pursue.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
There's some thoughts with you offline.
Yeah. Okay. Carlos, maybe we'll come back to this after a little bit, but at this point, I'd like to come back to Marty. You've got two more questions over there. Why don't we take care of those, and then we'll open the discussion.
All right, let's see now. Trying to decide on the two of them. So
you could have first one, then the other.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
In your articles, I'm trying to get my context back here. We talked about the possibility of interpreting science as a human endeavor. And you state in your article, bringing teleology and agency back into biological theory is not an attempt to shove the camel's nose of design or creationism into the tent, but a much needed solution to a fuller understanding of how life works and evolves. And I respect what you're trying to do here, and I think it's great for an ASA discussion. But you have to end up defining teleology and agency. And if it's merely an emergent complexity on top of physics, it's just a new label for a more complicated and higher faith level of materialism. It seems that we're torn between the teleology and an agency that has an agent or doesn't have an agent. And I appreciate the attempt to bring the sciences together, but I just don't know how to escape that. Most scientists, I think, are generally agnostic. They just want to do the science, but there's some who truly don't want there to be any discussion of an agent. And I think they'll be intolerant of the use of words, even words like agency or teleology. So this is great for an ASA discussion, but how do you think this will play out in the biological field generally? How are you finding that?
Very badly.
That's what I expected.
Oh, really terribly. Oh my goodness. Where do I start? Ernst Mayr, again, not a theist, not a Christian, but he wanted, by the way, I could post this quote. One of the people who keeps saying that teleology has to be put back into biology is Daniel Dennett. Not a Christian, I would say. Okay. So, but the point is that Dennett and Ernst Mayr and many others, biologists, have said, look, it's ridiculous to deny that animals and plants and bacteria have purposes or that they act. They do. Now, the question is, do they act like we act? No, they don't have conscious will. But they have systems built in that allow them to act. They have, receptors and chemical agents which they can receive and act upon. So the point is that agency and purpose are real. And what Mayr did, he didn't actually define this, but he used the term teleonomy to talk about a purpose which is not the kind of purpose that Aristotle was talking about, but what he called it was purpose from a program. And in that case, the program is the genetic makeup of the organism, which provides it with its ability to act. Fine. However, what you said is true. The great majority of biologists have really thrown purpose and agency out, don't want to hear the words. I made up this term agonomy to be the homologue of teleonomy, agency from a program. Okay, so acting from a program, not from a desire to act. The question is, where do you draw the line? Because it's not just humans that act with purpose. I mean, foxes act with purpose, and so do rabbits, and so do plants. I mean, you can even find bacteria that act with purpose. It may not be purpose to them. It's not our kind of purpose, but they certainly do things. And I have some examples in the paper. So it's a minefield. It's a very tricky minefield, and people like Jerry Coyne and to some extent Richard Dawkins, although a little less so, will just react violently to any suggestion that we bring vitalism back in, and even that is something that I will occasionally. I won't even bring it up here because even here is too risky, but. The idea that there may be another law that guides biology that we don't know yet, and you could call it a vital law or something, I don't know, but it could be a law of nature. We have four forces of nature that we know of. I'm not going to say much more about it because Randy will correct me, but we know that there are four forces. We don't really know where they come from either, and there could be a fifth force. And in fact, I have a quote, which I could let me see if I can share very quickly. This is from a paper in Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology, and that's a journal whose editor-in-chief is Dennis Noble. But it's not by him, it's by other people. And they say we're challenging evolutionary biology to advance boldly. And what they say is there should be a possibility of a fifth force, which I find very intriguing. And they further say mathematics should be rigorously applied to current and future evolutionary empirical discoveries, which I didn't talk about. But one of the problems with the theory of evolution as we have it is the lack of mathematical rigor. And that's a whole nother topic, which I'm not sure we need to get into. Anyway, I think I probably said enough on that one. It's a toughie. It's a hard road to follow. You had one more, I think, right?
I did have one other question. And this leveraged a little bit more off my first question. Along the lines of God of the gaps versus interpreting the science. Many of us believe that Jesus walked on water and we consider it a miracle. But we don't consider it a miracle because of gaps in our knowledge. Mm-hmm. Like the disciples, we recognize how water works and how gravity works, and somebody walking on water. Well, so I'm leveraging. You said you've spoken with Jim Tour, and he's probably, he's he can be a little severe at times, but I think the content of his presentations about origins is very cogent. And our science has shown us what a simple first cell requires. You've got to have metabolic pathways. You've got to have replication, which you talked about. And then there's got to be something that keeps it together that doesn't suffocate or drown it, in either waste or starving. So it's got to be a semi-permeable membrane with the appropriate, proteins to regulate the ingestion and waste management. So the proposal, I do wish that I'd had a chance to be in on the call with, maybe Randy will want to get in on this with the boring stump Isaac paper. But the proposal that this is a simplification of a more complex environment requires a level of complexity that just seems astronomical and for which there is no evidence. And I make the point in my question here that you probably read. The building block molecules in meteorites, to me, is grasping at straws. There's not enough concentrations of them. There's plenty of life-defeating molecules in there. You've got the chirality problem, and there's other things as well. Anyway, so to argue that origins of life is a simplification that just happened sort of on its own seems to me to qualify as a naturalism of the gaps argument in defiance of our scientific understanding. I just wonder what you thought.
Well, okay, so let me read you what I said.
Randy's laughing here, so he knows how I feel about this.
That's why you're such good friends, Marty.
Look, Randy and I have argued about these issues, 12 years maybe?
Yeah.
I lost track, but anyway,
it's good.
Randy is a great guy to argue with.
I agree.
I have a couple of columns about simplification, but the thing I could read aloud is perhaps one way of approaching this is to recognize that what biology does is simplify the possible collection of complex systems, resulting in simultaneous global simplification of systems with locally increasing complexity in each system. So in other words, both are happening. And I think the insight that was provided by Randy and Steve and Emily Boring, Steve Freeland and Emily Boring is very good. It's an insight that there's this what biology did was sort of focus to only a few systems that are actually used in all of life, which is a simplification in a way. And I don't think this goes against any of Jim Tour's arguments. His arguments are very chemical in nature. He's a chemist. He doesn't talk about systems very much. And, his arguments are very technically oriented towards the chemistry of synthesis of polymers, et cetera, and membranes, and which you mentioned. So I don't think there's a disagreement there. In terms of miracles. Yeah, I mean, again, we're, as you said, as your first question, we're in the realm of theology. And yes, I believe in Jesus Christ miracles. I believe in the resurrection, all of that. And I think we all, or most of us, do as Christians. But again, we have this built-in split personality as scientists and as, people who follow the book. And it doesn't mean that we're living in a state of cognitive dissonance, as I'm often accused of. It means that we have to really work hard and we have to think hard. And we have some good models to do that, including people like Steve Freeland and Randy and Francis Collins and a number of others. So I hope that answers it.
Well, I'll just quickly sidebar that the reason that Randy's so much fun to talk with is he's such a gentleman. He listens well. And I think that, modeling good conversations is really a good thing among believers.
Well, thank you, Marty. You're far too kind, but you don't see my tongue bleeding from keeping my mouth shut here. there's so much to say, so little time. Okay, but okay, let's. Those are all the questions submitted in advance, which typically take priority here. But let's open it up now for raised hands. I see Terry Gray is first on the list. So Terry, what do you have to say?
Hello. So I thank you for your paper, and I want to have a technical quibble to start with. So there's a paragraph, I guess it's page 152, where you talk about convergent evolution as being a mechanism. So an additional mechanism that clearly contributes to simplification, and so on. And I guess my quibble is, and I could point to other things I think in your paper that sort of have this pattern, is that these aren't really mechanisms. I would say these are patterns. And I think it's important to distinguish between those two, because the mechanism that leads to convergent evolution, has to do with, say, the physics of vision, for example, and just a limited number of physical and biological solutions to that particular problem. So I just want to press us to be more careful there with respect to using that kind of language. Randy, if it's okay, let me go ahead and make all three of my comments. And
sure,
then
you go ahead. Yeah,
let Sy
we're open now. Yeah,
respond with it. So I just wanted to ask. It sounds like you're familiar with this philosophy of biology literature. That includes Ernst Mayr and others. But I think that a lot of the problems you're describing and experiencing seem to be molecular biologist problems and biochemist problems. That the broader biology world has thought about this, and I don't know that we've articulated new laws, but there's a rich literature on in the philosophy of biology that's not just all written by philosophers, but is also included geneticists and biologists from the past 50 years. I'm thinking of books that I read in the 80s, for example, that are collections of essays by biologists, and I think the Ernst Mayr piece and essays like that are part of that as well. And so I think something that typifies that is the phrase in biology, structure function. Biologists and biochemists, I don't think are afraid of that phrase and that term. And that is, has a teleological dimension to it, right? That there's this function that exists in biological systems that is accomplished by this particular, protein structure or complex system that does that thing, but that thing contributes to the functioning, and so there's purposefulness in that function in terms of what it does in the organism. So I question whether or not biologists are so afraid of this idea as
asleep?
Let on.
Can I answer that one before you go further? Sorry, what?
Yeah.
Can I answer that one? So you're absolutely right about function being about biochemists and molecular biologists not being afraid of function. Quite the contrary, we use it all the time. And where the problem comes in is the idea that when you say an enzyme has a function, that what you said, that implies a purpose. That's not accepted by most evolutionary biologists. So I don't agree with you that this is a biochemistry molecular biology issue. I think it's a organismic biology issue. Or perhaps you could say evolutionary biology, or the more standard biologist issue of not actually equating. I mean, I agree with you. I equate function with the idea of a purpose. An enzyme has a function, which means it has a purpose. It does one thing, does it very well. But that kind of language is not acceptable. You can't say that in a paper, in a biological paper, or in a philosophy of biology paper at this point. So I'd be interested in your examples, because to me, the examples are really not from biochemistry and molecular biology, but from the pure biologists.
I mean, if anything, that's a new reticence, because I think even though I teach biochemistry and chemistry, my training is in biology, and my biology background has, even secular universities, has always included that structure, function. What's the purpose of this adaptation, and so on, and I understand, and I get the reticence in a sense, because of the kind of creationism and design ideas that are imported into the discussion through that mechanism. But there's no, in my mind, there's no hesitancy to say that a particular organ in an organism has this particular function and purpose.
Right, but that's absolutely true. But the problem is, if you start to label it as teleology or teleonomy, that's often not. It's almost always unacceptable. So in other words, because what happens is the word itself, even the word purpose. If you say there's purpose in life, this is why Dennett made this. Actually, I have a bunch of quotes I could put up. Maybe I should do that, because that'll make my point again with this slideshow.
I understand that it's part of the current debate. I'm not going to disagree with you about that, but
okay.
But it's a long-standing that's the way biology works. There's purpose, because there's this organism that is more than just the chemicals.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, in terms of your first point, I agree. That word was an error. It should not be mechanism. Let me just, I see Jim Peterson is here, so I could just blame him and the editors and reviewers for that one.
But actually, sorry.
Speaking of that, I actually would like to. I wanted to say this earlier. The paper, as it reads, is as bad as it might be and is incoherent. It's a lot better than it was when I first submitted it, because thanks to the work of the reviewers. So I would really like to give PSCF, Jim, and the reviewers a lot of credit. The comments were so helpful. I even almost asked Jim if one of them could be a co-author, because they really turned around some things that I had not very well. So this is an aside, but thank you, Jim. I see he's here. And I think everyone really owes a debt of gratitude for the great work that PSCF does in this field, which is
here.
So, all right. I think you had one more, Terry, right? Or are we done? Or are we done? You said you had 3 things.
I think I covered everything.
Okay.
That
Great, thanks.
I had in my first round of comments.
Well, since I don't see a raised, there it is. But I started making this, but I'll break my silence here a little bit, just for one of my 100 comments here to make. But I just wonder whether a lot of this kind of confusion is because of the ambiguity of the terms like purpose and teleology, because what I sense is this aversion in the scientific community to these words derives primarily from the fact that they have a predominant connotation of an external agent having a purpose for you. Whereas when biologists use that term, they use it not in that sense, but in the sense in which you and Terry were talking about, which is has a function. It carries out a function, and it exists as it exists. It is a function. But with the controversies about whether or not there are external agents that deal with it, I think there's a reluctance to use those terms for that reason. Now, you were very clear, Sy, in saying that you are not talking about an external agent, and Marty, with respect to the reasons to believe model, I would say if you're looking at an external non-physical model, you've kind of moved, as I said 2 months ago in that program, that you're moving into a category error here of really appealing to non-physical causes, which can't be studied. And now you're out of this realm of the science. And it may be a very appropriate theological answer, but it's not really scientific. So I think a lot of this is confusion of the terms. And I mean, purpose. So, Rick Warren never addressed this ambiguity in his book, Purpose-Driven Life. That purpose has these multiple meanings. Did you derive this purpose for your life of yourself? Is it externally devised? That conversation is needed. And I think that's the same over here from a biology point of view. And so I'm glad, Sy, that you were very explicit about that, because it really does look as if there is a purpose, but it is a result of the function of how it operates, in my view. Anyway, for what it's worth. Steve, you've got your hands up, or you want to? Okay, Terry, you want to comment on that?
I'm going to object to your as if there. That's a little bit of an equivocation that I don't think we have to say it looks like there's function.
No, you're right.
As if, and we could say both.
I didn't mean as if. You're right. You're right. I didn't express that right. It's not as if it has a function. I meant as if someone has endowed it with a purpose is what I meant to say. I didn't word it right. So
no, that's fine.
I need Jim and his reviewers to edit this properly before I say anything. Okay. All right. Steve, go ahead.
Thanks. I have a question, but I'll just join in on the tail end. I've always thought of teleology as teleos, Greek, coming from end or end goal, that there must be an intelligent agent that has planned a purpose for an end goal, which is much different from a purpose of function, maybe localized, if you will. there's more of an overarching part of teleology. But what I wanted to ask Sy is that since 2012, with the James Shapiro Evolution, A View from the 21st Century, 10 years has passed. And I'm wondering if what advances have been made, maybe focusing in on saltation here. Whole body fusion, that is an example, mitochondria in cells, both plant and animal, seem a type of commensalism that must have existed from early on, long before mitochondria engulfment. Is there research on the mechanics of engulfment, of joining?
There is research on that, but I'm not familiar with it. As a matter of fact, I'm reading a book by Lynn Margulis now. I just happened to find it, called "What Is Life?" Same title as Schrodinger's book, and it's a wonderful book. She talks about the process, her research into discovering the endosymbiosis phenomenon. But it's not complete. And this book was written in 1997, obviously before her death. And I know that there is research going on, but I'm not up on it as to how that worked. What else? You were asking, what you said about teleology is absolutely true, which is, I think, why Meyer, who wanted to talk about purpose, didn't use it. He said we should use this word teleonomy, because teleology is a philosophical term used by Aristotle, which does imply a final cause from a conscious agent. And that's kind of restrictive in a biological sense. So I like the idea of teleonomy because it refers to a program, and we know that all biological organisms have programs. And where they come from is another issue, but we won't get into that. And that's why I invented this new word, which a couple of people have actually used it, which is a surprise to me, which is agonomy, which means an agent, a bacteria that doesn't decide, obviously, that's the point. A bacteria under stress will begin to hypermutate, and that's a very complex process that involves, the rapid error-prone repair of DNA lesions, causing a high rate of mutation in a very specific region of the genome. And it's remarkable, but bacteria doesn't say, "Gee, let's do this because we're in trouble." It's programmed in, through evolution. So. But that's still an act. It's an amazing act that a bacterium does, or a population of bacteria do. So you need a word for that. And, agency doesn't quite work because, as I said, no bacteria says, let's do this, folks. Come on, let's all mutate. No, but they do it anyway, even if it's not conscious and it's not a conscious agent and it's not a final cause in the Aristotelian sense, but they do it because of this agonomy, which is universal in life.
Well, I too have been looking for a word for that, and maybe one exists, but as an example, considering mobile transposal elements and whole genome duplication, etc., can it be said, or can there be a word invented that from early on, DNA had its own internal homeostasis, responding to the stresses of life? We talk about the whole body homeostasis, but how about the DNA itself?
Yeah, no, that's true. And homeostasis is an incredibly important feature. Claude Bernard, the 18th century physiologist, I think it's 18th, might be 19th, sorry. His whole thing was homeostasis as the basis of life. And it was something that he really was able to get into mainstream biology, which people hadn't really thought about. Every part of life involves homeostasis, including, as you said, the DNA, which is, responsible for so much else.
And I don't know if this is something you were searching for, but I was aware of the term Darwinian threshold as when I think Carl Wolf's used it to show when complexity increased to an amount that protected the DNA from rampant horizontal transfer and became less malleable to change. Is that a term you were looking for in the background someplace?
I'll have to look at it. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll have to look into it.
It came up, but
Yeah.
Carl Wolf's loved the guy. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, Sy, may I follow up on a question here from what you just said about the terms teleonomy, agonomy, etc. I guess, I don't have any particular concern with those terms the way you've defined it, but I'm wondering what problem do those terms resolve? I mean, you very carefully specified that you're not referring to an external agent. You carefully asserted that you're not dealing with any vitalism, as was known in 19th or 18th century. So what I'm struggling to understand what it really means, because you haven't defined a fifth force, you haven't identified one, you know that, but these terms, I'm just wondering what problem does it solve by using those terms?
So it's a good question, and I think the answer is first of all, this is not related to any mythical fifth force, which is really only in the back of my mind. I showed that quote because other people are thinking about it, which I think is interesting. I don't have anywhere to go with it, so I'm not pursuing it. But in terms of agonomy and teleonomy, the issues that they resolve are allowing us to acknowledge the fact that all biological organisms, at least if nothing else, have a purpose to survive and to replicate themselves. That life depends on those two things. But
isn't that an inherent part of Darwinian thought? I mean, that's already well known. I mean, it doesn't seem to provide anything new that helps us understand anything.
It is part of Darwin. It is part of evolutionary mechanism. I agree. But just because something, you can say, well, this happened because of evolution. That doesn't necessarily give you a handle on how to further explore what it is. So, for example, the example I used, if you're talking about hypermutation by bacteria to increase their chances of survival, that system is, yes, it's evolutionarily, can be evolutionarily traceable in terms of the mechanism. But how do you talk about it if you can't use the word bacteria act to do this? In other words, you have to, in order to understand it, you have to be able to refer to it. You need a term like teleonomy, which talks about, the fact that that life has purposes that are built in a program. And the same thing is true for action.
Yeah, if we define purposes in such a way that we're talking about a higher level description of the biochemical processes that are occurring, okay, I can see that, though. I guess it does go beyond that. I guess it's a simplification. I should probably let Terry comment here. You've got your hand raised.
I was going to change the subject completely.
You were? I don't know if that's allowed yet. No.
Well, actually, I think just a quick answer is thought about your comment is that teleology has a long history in
philosophy
and religion.
Yeah, right.
And so I think the philosophers of science who were thinking about this were trying to come up with a term that didn't bring all that baggage in. But my question is, sort of, I just want to throw out the comment. I don't care if you can respond if you want, but the exchange between Sy and Marty about origin of life, and I just want to make a pitch for metabolism first as a mechanism of evolution that's actually cell-free. Okay, so when Marty described what was required to have life as we know it, he was describing the simplest cell system he could come up with, and of course that is very complicated, very complex, and has all of these bits and pieces. And I just think we ought to be a little more creative and think about life not in terms of a cell, some simplified entity, but a system that has some of the characteristics of cells. And you comment on that if you want, but just thought I'd throw that out.
I mean, I think that the way you define it, metabolism first, is gaining the upper hand these days. I know I switched from replicated metabolism, and of course with Jeremy England's work on heat dissipation and cycles that go on outside of cells, chemical cycles, that's gotten a big foothold. But I still am skeptical based on concentration and basic chemical issues that you really can get stuff started without an enclosed membrane and that leads to high concentrations. But that this as well or better than I do, that we're talking about mass action and things. So I don't know the answer, but you're right that metabolism first is definitely overtaking the RNA world, for example, which was the most recent replicative first idea, and we'll see what happens. I mean, it's a very exciting field.
Okay, Del. Oh, you got to unmute yourself. It's a little hard to hear. Okay, now.
Okay, yeah, just kind of noticing that we, meaning biologists for the last 150 years, have all kind of been talking around, we don't want to have vitalism. And as a non-student, I'd be tempted to assign a term paper to define homeostasis, teleology, teleonomy, and agency, and then leave the room. But as a more or less serious question, I wonder if mathematicians have anything to contribute to the question of what is it, can we put a quantity on what it is we're trying to talk about, and maybe avoid some of the philosophical baggage that comes along with kind of half-defined English terms.
That's great. I'm going to defer to Randy, who knows a little bit more math than I do.
It's beyond the scope of this program, but I like your suggestion, Del, of assigning it to somebody to sort out. It's a tough one, but it needs to be done. It's a good point. Yep. Paul, I think we're coming towards the end here. We might have room for one or two more. Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on. Richard Dawkins has said evolution or biology is blind, meaningless chance. And I'd like to contrast that with, I think it's Simon Conway Morris, also a biologist, who says that evolution has a direction, and he calls it convergence. In other words, he notices that evolution is converged toward two kinds of eyes, namely the insect eye and the camera eye, which of course we have. So I like to just to bring in the idea of at least direction. But in ASA, we're supposed to be interested in integrating science and religion, and purpose is an inherent part of religion, in my view. Meaning and purpose is part of religion. And I'd like to throw out a Whitehead process idea of basically the basic idea that that God, there is a divine power which he calls God, which lures rather than controls. His idea is it lures or guides. He used the term that there is a divine power that guides the existence, not just biological, but existence itself, toward his goal, toward a purpose. Which, by the way, Whitehead identifies as greater beauty. He says the purpose or the teleology of the universe is toward greater beauty, and I admit within the biological or the purely scientific community, we don't talk about teleology. But if you want to integrate science and religion, I think you have to bring in something like process thought.
Sy?
No, I appreciate the comment, Paul. I don't really have anything to add.
Mm-hmm. Okay, your point well taken, Paul. Thank you. All right, one final question, Marty.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts, Terry. I agree with what Sy said about it's not simply metabolism first or replication first or RNA world, that sort of thing. The emphasis I would make is that there's just the environment doesn't have the right stuff in it for almost any of this stuff to happen. The building blocks are it's just a mess. If there's anything of useful, there's just a massive junk as well. And getting that to self-organize it just strikes me as, if there's anything there at all, it's the thing. But then coming back to Randy and the statement that a discussion of origins of life is a category error, that's a philosophical statement that would be true if I was in a scientific meeting, I think, trying to figure out how to do good science going forward and how to study something. But again, and I used my analogy earlier of when you're in an English class, you're not just studying grammar and words and definitions. You're trying to figure out what somebody meant and how it impacts life and what its significance is. And so I guess I feel that depending on the context, it could be a category error if I was at a scientific discussion and I was saying, oh, no, there's nothing to do because God did it all. Well, that's not helpful at all. That is a category error. But in the context of, I still think there's tons of science to do. But in the context of this discussion and in the context of plenty of discussions where I'm not focused on the science, maybe we'll agree to disagree, but I don't feel it's a category error.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Marty. And obviously, we'll talk a lot more about this offline and in private, but I've got a minute and a half left here. So let me just comment that when I say category error, it's in the context of when scientific explanations and the explanation of an intelligent mind or a creator, something, when they're put in positions of competing with each other. To me, that's the category error. If you kind of say you want an inference to a best explanation and you say we've got this scientific proposal of evolution, you've got this proposal of a creator or of an intelligent mind, whatever that is, you're trying to compare these as competing explanations. That's the category error. It's not that both are true. I think most of us in this audience will say, yeah, it's right that the creator did this, and we don't know exactly how he did this. And so we accept that as a broader truth outside the scientific community. That's not a category error. It's just more of a complementarity issue of phrasing it. So, and with that, it's 3:29 here, and I want to thank all of you for attending. I want to thank you for stimulating discussion. Sy, I really appreciate your writing that article, and I know we'll have some good discussions about that in the future. So thank you all, and farewell.